نقرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ونريد أن نمن على الذين استضعفوا في الأرض ونجعلهم أئمة ونجعلهم الوارثين. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكرنا المسائب آل محمد. May Allah increase in our reward for commemorating the difficulties of Ahlul Bayt. This shahadat in particular has many of the signatures of oppression. And this personality is one of the A'immah whose oppression is very extreme. When we look at the verse of Quran we began our discussion with, and Allah is making the statement and He says, and we have intended to bestow our favor upon those who are oppressed, mustad'afin. This explanation is part of the reason why the next day after this shahadat is considered Eid al-Zahra, and that there are those who celebrate the day after this shahadat. Now, some have a hard time of understanding that one day we are very sad, and the next day, immediately after that, we're happy. And that how could this be possible? But you see, the explanation comes to and says that this shahadat is the shahadat that was both most feared and expected. Feared, why? Because it meant that after this was going to come the door of the 12th Imam, يَمْلَأُ الْأَرْضَ عَدْلًا وَقِسْطًا كَمَا مُلِئَتْ ظُلْمًا وَجَوْرًا. That this day after the shahadat, we have certainty that the time has come where Allah will bring the one who will fill this earth with justice and equity, the way it has been filled with oppression and abuse. And that the calling to this Imam was something that began even in the door of Sayyidah Zahra. That even as the Prophet in his life would say, أَفْضَلُ الْأَعْمَالِ أُمَّتِي انْتِظَارَ الْفَرَجِ. And that this shahadat brings the doorway to the faraj coming now. And that famously there are narrations that describe at the shahadat of Sayyidah Zahra that when she was pressed behind the door that she called out, "Oh my son Mahdi, why do you not come to aid your mother?" So meaning this was a day and time that was expected, and which is why the fulfillment of that promise, the completion of the mission of the Ahlul Bayt, the fulfillment of the promises of the Quran is part of the reason why the day after today's shahadat is a day of celebration. However, this shahadat itself is one that is marked by oppression because the oppression of this Imam didn't begin with his imamat, it began way before that. And for that, we have to have a little bit of an understanding of the life of the Imam, and we'll talk briefly about his biography and share some of the points from his life with your loudest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. It's important to understand something, that the knowledge of the coming of Imam Zaman was not something that just we possessed. Rather, it was something that was well known from the earlier parts of the religion of Islam. As a matter of fact, this taking of Banu Asad, of taking the authority away from the Banu Umayyah, was by using the tool of the discussion of Imam Zaman himself. There's a narration that describes that in the door of the 6th Imam, when the Banu Hashim were gathering together and were planning to overthrow the rule of the Banu Umayyah, they gathered all of the children of Banu Hashim into one room and they brought Imam Sadiq. And they said to Imam Sadiq, we're planning to do an uprising, and this Muhammad ibn Hassan is the Mahdi. And that he will be the Mahdi who will now change the world for the positive, and we will rally behind him, and he will be our leader. And in this room, we're sitting Safa and also Mansour and also the others of the Banu Abbas. We're all sitting in one room as this conversation was going on. Meaning what? In the time of Imam Sadiq, they already knew that the son of Imam Hassan will be the Mahdi and that he will be the one who fills the earth with justice. And the Banu Abbas sat there and looked at their cousin and said, yes, he is the Mahdi. We will support him. We will help him. And he will be the one who takes the government. Meaning the Banu Abbas had leveraged the Banu Hashim behind the love of the Mahdi to go and steal authority and to take the government. To the extent where Imam Sadiq says, no, this is not the Mahdi, and you're making a mistake and this isn't the time for uprising, those same people turned and said, you're just jealous. You wish that you had the authority, but truly we know that the son of Hassan will be the one who rises up, and this is a son of Hassan, he is a pious man, and he is the one who we will make in charge of the entire nation, and he will take authority. Under this premise, you can see that the Banu Abbas, from the beginning of their hukuma, when they stole the right from the children of Imam Hassan, knew of both the fact that, one, the son of Imam Hassan will be the Mahdi, and that two, that the Mahdi will be the one who makes the world into a better place and will fix the wrongs of society. Therefore, one of the interesting things that happens is that if you look at history, you see that the Banu Abbas were much more severe against the Ahlul Bayt than even the Banu Umayyah. The Banu Umayyah killed 4 of the A'immah, but the Banu Abbas killed 7 of them. Not just that. When the Banu Abbas took the authority, they would regularly persecute the children of Imam Hassan. To the extent where today, if you see someone who is a Sayyid Tabatabai is actually the children of Imam Hassan, who ran away from Hijaz for the fear of persecution and changed their names to Tabataba from the place where they went and found security because of the level of persecution that the Banu Abbas did against them. There are so many of the children of Ahlul Bayt that were killed, and especially the children of Imam Hassan who were killed by the Banu Abbas. Which is why now when you look at the life of Imam Hassan al-Askari, you find it to be one that is marked with oppression even before his imamate, is marked with secrecy even before his imamate. And you take a look and you see that his life is only of 28 years, where his imamate is only of 6 years, and people only knew about him for a total of 2 years before his imamate. Meaning Imam al-Hadi hid the imamate of his son from the public. And there's a technique to this. You guys okay? A little bit of history? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You see, before they knew about Imam Hassan, the philosophy was this, that from the children of Imam Hussain will come all of the Imams, and then from the children of Imam Hassan will come one Imam. And all of these Imams that come, the 8 that will come from Imam Hussain, very good, very pious, but the one that comes from Imam Hassan will be the one that changes the world. So what happened? The Banu Abbas began the persecution of all of these people. To such an extent that when the dawr of Imam al-Hadi comes, that the persecution upon the A'imma is very severe. And part of this persecution was the moving to the city of Samarra. Now understand something. Samarra was initially known as Askar, or Askar, the place of the army, and the reason for this was the dawr of Mu'tasim. Mu'tasim's mother was a Turkish woman, and when Mu'tasim took the Khilafat, he brought in a series of Turkish soldiers, but not as part of the army, because the army was loyal to the Khilafat, was loyal to the state of Islam. He brought in Turkish soldiers to protect himself, because the Banu Abbas had frequent turmoil amongst themselves and fighting amongst themselves. So he brought in Turkish soldiers that were the king's guard, so to speak. And these king's guard had the job of only protecting Mu'tasim, and they were loyal to him. Even if the entire government turned against him, he would use these guards. Now at this time, in the time of Mu'tasim, his Khilafat began where the capital was in the city of Baghdad. And he brought all of these foreign Turkish soldiers into Baghdad. The problem was that the Turkish soldiers said, we're loyal to the king and we have immunity. We can do anything we want to. You can't stop us. So the people of Baghdad would regularly be abused by these guards of the king, these Turkish people, to the extent where they would describe and say that if you were walking down the street and a guard happened to be passing by, it was his right that if he trampled you and killed you. If you were a child running and not paying attention, if you were an adult, if you happened to be in their way, they didn't stop for you. So the entire city of Baghdad now started complaining that, O king, O Mu'tasim, O Khalifa, your guards are killing the people of Baghdad. Baghdad is a major city, and these people are abusive and oppressive to us, and it started to create turmoil in the city of Baghdad, to where it was eventually Mu'tasim was forced to come to the conclusion, I need to move my capital, I need to move this army that's loyal to me out of the city, and I need to find another place that would be safe for us. So he moves to the place of what is today called Surra Man Ra'a or Samarra, and he moved this entire regiment of Turkish soldiers into that place. So the whole purpose of Samarra was what? To house the Turkish soldiers loyal only to the king and make this a place where the Khilafat would be entirely safe and away from everyone. Which is why once he establishes his base in Samarra, he calls Imam al-Hadi, and he imprisons Imam al-Hadi in the city, in this very city. Now both the 10th Imam and the 11th Imam are known as Askari, meaning the people, the Imams that were kept and stationed in the town of soldiers, in the location of soldiers, which was the first name of this location. Imam Hassan gets this title more so. Why? Because when Imam Hadi moved to the city, Imam Hassan was only 2 years old, meaning the entirety of his life was spent in a garrison town around the military. Now, even before this, and this is where his title comes from, Al-Askari, that he is known as from the place where he was kept and he was raised and spent the entirety of his life. But even in that situation, he was unknown to anyone initially. How? Imam al-Hadi had 4 sons. His oldest was Muhammad, then it was Hassan, then it was Hussain and Ja'far, or Ja'far and Hussain, one way or the other. The discussion comes and says that today, the grave of Muhammad, the son of Imam al-Hadi, is very famous in Iraq, and he is also known as Sab' al-Dujail, the Lion of Dujail, meaning he had a very noble personality to the extent where, him being the oldest son, everyone expected the Imam after Imam al-Hadi to be this Muhammad. And it's described to say Muhammad was always followed around by a young boy who was always in his company. And that in some histories it's written that this Muhammad would be the teacher of the boy that was with him constantly. The people became so sure that this Muhammad is going to be the next Imam after Imam al-Hadi that the Khulafa went and assassinated Muhammad. Muhammad left the city of Samarra with the intention of performing Hajj or Umrah. And as soon as he left and reached a place called Balad, he suddenly fell very sick and died. He was a young man. So his dying in sickness suddenly is very unusual. So this is why we know that he was poisoned and killed. When this young man was killed, the Banu Hashim, all of the Shia learned of the death of the son of Imam al-Hadi, and they gathered together for the janazah of the son of Imam Hadi. When they gathered together, the Shia amongst themselves were having a conversation. If he died, who's going to be the Imam after Imam al-Hadi? And this is where you see some of the narrations come in and describe and say that as we sat for the janazah of Sayyid Muhammad, we sat by Imam al-Hadi, we saw a young man appear through the door as if we had never seen him before. And he was the most handsome man we had ever seen. And he had perfect akhlaq, and when he came to the janazah of his brother, he tore at his collar in grief and sorrow over the loss of his brother. As soon as the Shia saw him, they immediately recognized that this young man possesses something we haven't seen in anyone else right now. And they immediately came to the realization that this was going to be the next Imam. Famously, Imam al-Hadi has a conversation with his son as he cries over his brother and says to him, that, oh Hassan, thank Allah because even in this difficulty, Allah has removed from you many other difficulties. Madmun al-riwayah. The general context of what he was saying was to say that be thankful to Allah for He has removed from you difficulties in this difficulty. What was the significance of this conversation? At this time, Imam Hassan al-Askari was 20 years old. His brother was maybe 25. The world believed that Sayyid Muhammad was going to be the Imam. They didn't recognize the authority of Imam Hassan. Why? Because Sayyid Muhammad was very public, was very well known, was known for his akhlaq and good character. And as I mentioned, some historians would even narrate he was the teacher of Imam Hassan. Why? Because the two were always seen in company together. But Imam al-Hadi is explaining, and he's saying, oh Hassan, had your brother lived through this event, it would have been possible that the ummah would have split into directions of choosing him or you for imamate. But even in the shahadat of your brother, Allah has affixed a khair in this difficulty that now the ummah will stay united and acknowledge your imamat and not be split into sections. So meaning what? Up until the age of 20, the community, the society, the tariq would be written that this older brother was the more noble one. But in reality, those who understand the seerah of Aimma alayhimus salam understand that when these two would be in company together, it was Imam Hassan who was guiding his older brother. It was Imam Hassan who was teaching his older brother. It was Imam Hassan who was the source of the goodness in Sayyid Muhammad. And at the shahadat of Sayyid Muhammad, the goodness of Imam Hassan himself was revealed. So meaning that up until the age of 20, no one was paying attention to Imam Hassan al-Askari, meaning the khulafa who were looking to end the lineage of imamat didn't acknowledge and even believe that he was the imam until the age of 20. And it said that at the age of 22 is when his father Imam al-Hadi becomes martyred and Imam Hassan al-Askari begins his dawrah of imamat. Now the dawrah of imamat of Imam Hassan al-Askari is only a period of 6 years. And majority of the 6 years of his imamat are spent in prison. Why? The Khulafa knew and understood that he is the one who will be the father of the 12th Imam. Now suddenly they understood that this is the 11th Imam, the 12th is expected to be the Mahdi, and that it will be his son. So they persecuted Imam Hassan al-Askari, where majority of his imamat is spent in prison. To the extent where there's a discussion that says everything of the 6 years is spent under prison or house arrest, where only 1.5 years the Imam had the ability to guide and lead the community publicly. There's a story. You guys want to hear a story? Here's it. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Famously, it's reported in this garrison town now where the Khalifa sat, a drought took place. And the drought became very severe to where the Muslimin would gather and recite Salat al-Istisqa. Now, all of the mustahab salat in Islam are recited furada, meaning you can't do jama'ah for mustahab prayer. If you want to do Salat Ja'far al-Tayyar, you have to do it furada. You want to pray Salat al-Layl, you have to do it furada, with the exception of Salat al-Istisqa. Salat al-Istisqa is the prayer for rain, and it is the only mustahab prayer that we have noted that you can do in jama'ah. So famously, the people of Samarra were gathering together. In some narrations, it says Samarra, in some narrations, it says the city of Baghdad. The people were gathering together and they were praying for rain, and it wouldn't rain. It happened that a Christian monk happened upon the city as the people were leaving their shops to go recite Salat al-Istisqa. So the monk comes and he sees everybody closing their shop and walking away. He says, where are you going? Where's everybody going? They say, well, we're in a drought, and what we do in a drought is we gather together as all of the Muslimin and we pray that it rains. The monk says, can I come with you? Sure, come, fine. Now the Muslimin gather and they pray. Nothing happened. Monk says, do you mind if I try? They say, sure, go ahead, pray, let's see what happens. The monk prays and immediately it rains. And the people are very astounded. In this astoundment, they come to question the fact. They said, listen, we're Muslim. We thought we're on the right religion. But here comes this man who's not a Muslim, and he prays and it rains. And we pray and it doesn't rain. So the Muslimin of the city, they begin to question now. They said, are we really on the right religion? As they're having this debate amongst themselves, the news reaches the Khalifa. The Khalifa says, so what? He said, no, Khalifa, you don't understand. You're Khalifatul Muslimin. If Islam isn't the right religion and they all change religions, you're a Khalifa of nothing anymore. You need to make sure they stay Muslim, otherwise you're Khalifa of nothing. So he says, okay, what's the solution then? And the wazirs eventually give a suggestion. They say that in difficulty we have found the children of Zahra to protect the religion of Allah. So they describe and say that you have one of the sons of Zahra in your prison, Imam al-Askari. Maybe he has a solution to this problem. So sure enough, the Wazir recommends that the Khalifa take out Imam Hassan al-Askari and see if he can solve this problem. And they take Imam Hassan al-Askari and they say, the religion of your grandfather needs you. Go and protect the religion. Imam Hassan al-Askari comes out. The people of the city gather together to see what happens now. Because the Khalifa has sent a solution to show that Islam is right and the monk is wrong. So they describe and say that Imam Hassan al-Askari comes, meets this man and says, you can make it rain when you pray. He says, yes, I pray and it rains. Imam says, okay, go ahead, show us. Man prays, it rains. Imam says, take what he possesses in his hand and take away from him what he has. And sure enough, they find in his hand he had something. They take it away and the Imam says, now pray. And the man prays and it doesn't rain. Imam explains and says, it wasn't that the Christian is on the right religion and Allah is answering him. Rather, the Christian man came upon a tabarruk, a special item. And by the wasila of that item, his dua was accepted, not because of anything he did. So they asked Ibn Rasulullah, what did he possess? And the Imam explains and he says, he found somewhere a bone of a prophet of Allah. And one of the unique attributes of the prophets of Allah is that they possess a dignity with Allah that Allah does not let their body remain uncovered on this earth, such that if their grave ever becomes uncovered, that it rains upon that body until the soil comes and covers the body and gives it respect. So this man didn't have barakat himself, rather it was the barakat of this bone that whenever it's exposed under the open sky, rain will come. And in this way, he was able to fool the people to believe that his religion was correct and the religion of Islam was wrong. Then they describe and say that Imam Hassan al-Askari prayed, and the proper rain came that solved and ended the drought entirely. Upon the completion of this story, the people of the city then began to complain and they said, we possess someone like this amongst us. There is such a guide and knowledgeable man of the religion that has been kept away from us. And the consequence of this is that the Khalifa was forced to release Imam Hassan al-Askari for a short period of time from the prison to where he was accessible to the people. Some descriptions say that this period that he was allowed to be amongst the people and guide them was not more than a year and a half. 18 months he had in public. And the rest of the time was either in arrest or house arrest. The house arrest of Imam al-Askari during these 6 years is described to explain in such a way that every Monday and every Thursday, he had to present himself either at the Khalifa's office or the governor's office of Samarra, and he was not allowed to speak to anyone. The Shia, what they would do is they would come, because they weren't allowed to go to the house of the Imam, they would come to try and speak to him while he would be walking from his house to the palace. And there are narrations that describe and say that the Imam would forbid them because he would show them that if you came to me in this moment, your life would be in danger, my life would be in danger. To the extent where there's one narration that describes that one man who lays his eyes upon Imam Askari walking through the streets of Samarra and seeing the people watching him and gathering around him, imagines within himself, he says, if I was to raise my voice now and announce to these people that this is the authority of Allah in front of you, why are you ignorant of his rights? Why do you not support him? Would people support him? He says, as I was thinking this, I made eye contact with Imam al-Askari and he motioned for me to be silent and not to say anything. And later he sent a messenger to me that explained and said, if you were to do this, it would cause the spilling of the blood of many people. Don't do such an action. Meaning the oppression of his arrest was such that he was almost to the extent where unable to or not allowed to interact freely with the believers. But still, don't imagine that the 6 years of this Imam's imamat was without guidance for humanity. No, the Imam is always a guide. The world may try to stop him, but the impact of the Imam remains in this world. Understand something. Look at his life. His imamat begins at 22 and his shahadat is at 28. 6 years. 6 years where today, when you look at a 22-year-old, he's still trying to figure out, what do I do with myself? At 28, we say maybe he's grown. It used to be at 28, people had houses and marriages and children, and now at 28, we're begging our children, please get married. But look at the seerah of Imam Hassan. that not only at the age between 22 and 28 is that he is a guide and a preserver of the religion of Islam, but his impact is felt till today. There's a variety of things that we can see the hidayah of the Imam that he gives to us, and with that we'll mention a few of them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Most famously is a hadith that comes from the Imam that has an impact till today, where he says, Alamat al-mu'min khamsa, salatu bi-ahda wa khamseen, wa tahfar bil-jabeen, wa takhtumu bil-yameen, wa ziyarat al-arba'een, wa jahr bi-bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is one of the most famous narrations and authentic narrations that we have from our 11th Imam, where he says the signs of a believer are 5. That he is someone who prays 51 rakat a day, keeps a ring in his right hand, he recites the ziyarat of arba'een, he has the mark of sujood on his forehead, and he is someone who recites in his salat out loud, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This hadith of the Imam is different than many of the other ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt of the Alamat al-Mu'min. The difference being this, that when you look at the hadith of Imam Ali or Imam Zainul Abidin or Imam Sadiq that talks about the alamat of mu'min, there are those where a person recognizes his relationship with Allah and measures, am I a mu'min? The hadith of Imam al-Askari was to point out and to show and say, in kana fi makanin sa'ba alayk ta'arafu ahada. That if you are in a place where it's difficult to figure out who is a believer, who is not, then look for these 5 signs in their character, and this is how you will find a believer. The signs of a believer that Imam al-Askari indicated were those that in a difficult situation, you can look at someone, listen to their actions, see their words, see their behavior, and know that this is a believer without him being able to say to you openly, yes, I am someone who loves Ahlul Bayt. Look at the impact of that hadith that till today, the ziyarah of Arba'een has millions upon millions attending this ziyarah. And that this has become a sign in the world of the love of Ahlul Bayt, to the extent where people come, and now people who aren't Muslim come in fascination to understand the character of those who love Ahlul Bayt. They want to see what it feels to be a mu'min, what it feels, what these people behave, and what do they actually believe. It's the largest peaceful gathering in the entire world. And it's one of the impacts of the hadith of the Imam that he insists that if you want to be known as the followers of Ahlul Bayt, ensure that this is a part of your character. Others that we see that the Imam had an impact and protection of the religion of Islam is one of the famous stories of a philosopher who existed at the time who is known as Ishaq al-Qindi or Ya'qub ibn Ishaq al-Qindi. Ya'qub ibn Ishaq al-Qindi is a man who was a philosopher who was writing a book, At-Tanaqud al-Quran, At-Tanaqudat fil Quran, something to this effect that essentially said the contradictions of the Quran. And Ishaq al-Qindi goes through the process of writing a book, and he says, I have found places in which the Quran has ta'arud, has conflict, has problems in the Quran, and I shall expose it for the people. One of the students of this Ishaq happened to come into contact with the Imam of our time, Imam Hassan al-Askari, and Imam explains to him, and he says, why don't you fix him? Why don't you correct his mistaken character? They say, Yabna Rasulullah, he's our teacher. If we had the ability to correct him, we wouldn't be his students. So the Imam gives instruction. He says, I'll teach you how to correct him if you have the ability and the bravery to stand up to him. They said, well, stand up to him, but teach us how. Imam explains, and he says, why don't you go to this Ishaq and ask him a question? Could it be possible that the one who revealed the Quran meant something and you understood something different than what he intended? Is it possible? In some narrations, it says the discussion was, ask him, if I'm speaking to you, when I speak to you, what I mean, is it what I choose it means, or is it what you, the listener, choose what it means? Meaning that, is the intention or the purpose of speech indicated by the speaker or by the listener? He says, Ishaq will definitely reply that the use of words are chosen and their meaning is chosen by the speaker, not by the listener. And then ask Ishaq, then can it be that you as the listener of the Quran have misunderstood the intention of the speaker of the Quran? And famously, Ishaq al-Qindi, when he's asked this question, he immediately recognizes that where he is seeing conflict in the Quran is based on his interpretation, not the actual meaning of what Allah meant when he said these words. So all of his effort immediately goes out the window. So Ishaq says to his student, he says, who taught you this? And the student goes, it just kind of came to me. And Ishaq says, if it just came to you, you wouldn't be my student. No, someone taught you this. And the student replies that he says, I sat with Hassan ibn Ali, and he is the one who taught me this. Ishaq replies and he says, certainly you are correct. And Ishaq burns the book that he was writing. Meaning that this man, and if you look through history, you'll find that the personality of Ishaq al-Kindi is not a normal person. He was a famous philosopher and teacher of the Banu Abbas, to the extent where had he written this book, he would have created doubt in the entire religion of Islam, and that his message would have lived on much longer. The Imam interacting with him and fixing his mistake was one of the ways that the Imam preserved the religion till today. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There are other examples, including, for example, there's a tafsir that is noted as the tafsir of Imam Hassan al-Askari. And this tafsir is over 600 pages long, and there's a debate to say that was this tafsir actually taught by the Imam or not? That do we really possess a tafsir of the Quran as taught by Imam al-Askari? There are two positions about this. One position says yes, that this is the tafsir of the Imam, but it's not written by the Imam because the language that's used in it is the language of a normal person and not the language of the Imam. The language of the Imam is something like what we see in Nahj al-Balagha. That the language of the Imam is something that has precision to it. It has a beauty to it. To where the famous statement comes, Al-Kalamul Imam, Imamul Kalam. That the speech of an Imam is the best of speeches possible. So there are those who look at this and say, yes, it's from Imam al-Askari, walakin. However, the Imam didn't write it with his own hands. This is what the students took from him, and they understood it, and they wrote it down as a tafsir that the Imam taught to them. Other ulama make the statement and say that no, this is something else that has been misattributed to the Imam. And they make the argument, they say that those who gave us this tafsir said that we sat for 7.5 years in the company of the Imam writing this every day. And those ulama point to and say that how is it possible? One, the imamat of the Imam is only 6 years. And two, most of that time was spent in prison and away from the people. How could they have had the opportunity to spend 7.5 years with the Imam to be able to write this tafsir from him? One of the answers that comes is to say is that the 7.5 years didn't have to be during his imamat. It could have been while he was under the authority of his father that he was teaching the Quran. And we essentially come to the conclusion, say there's benefit in this tafsir. There are good things in this tafsir, but it is not hujjah to say that this is the only tafsir that we need to look at. Rather, it is a source of guidance, and there are some good things in it, and we take those good things and we benefit from them to the best of our ability. Some of the statements of the Imam as well too were things that were beneficial to us beyond the scope of what we would imagine a normal person can do. We take a look at one of the statements of our 11th Imam. إِنَّ الْوُصُولِ إِلَى اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ سَفَرٌ لَا يُدْرِكُ إِلَّا بِإِمْتِتَاعِ اللَّيْلِ. Imam al-Askari would explain and say, and give instruction, O mu'mineen, understand something. Reaching Allah Jalla wa Ala is a journey that cannot be accomplished except by riding through the night or by traveling through the night. Meaning what? There are two interpretations to this hadith of the Imam. One that says that don't imagine that you can be someone who has a proximate relationship with Allah except that you exert yourself in the service of Allah when everyone else is resting. The common traveler does what? Travel during the day, rest during the night. Imam al-Askari is explaining, if you want to be close to Allah, don't imagine you can do that without extra exertion above and beyond what everybody else does. The other interpretation of this is to say that the Imam is being literal, that the exertion of the night is Salatul Layl. Don't imagine that you can have a closer relationship to Allah without the performance of Salatul Layl. That Salatul Layl is something that's necessary if you want to have a close relationship with Allah. We see, for example, in other teachings as well, where the Imam is instructing us, مَا مِن بَلِيَّةٍ إِلَّا وَلِلَّهِ فِيهَا نِعْمَةٌ تَحِيطُ بِهَا. This statement of the Imam is something we benefit from till today, and it's something that we should all apply and keep in our life. That the Imam is making an explanation to say that every affliction that befalls you, every difficulty you go through in life as a believer, has within it a blessing, such that the blessing is the one that encompasses the entirety of the difficulty and is better for you than the difficulty itself. This statement, if we were to apply it in our life, would be something that would always make us have patience in the face of trial. In the moment of that trial, a person thinks that God has deserted me or that Allah is without me. But one who has certainty in Allah knows that the blessing Allah will give me for this trial is far greater than the trial itself. And those of us who have spent some years know that there are times in our life where we go through a difficulty. And in that moment, it's very difficult. But afterwards, we realize, there was a benefit that I achieved something. I found hidayah in a way I couldn't have if I didn't have this difficulty befall me. There are those who describe and say that sickness in our old age, while difficult for us, it made our children pious and listen to us and sit in our company. There are those, I recently sat with a gentleman who's in the hospital. He says, the way my children treat me today, the way that they sit with me now, I would rather go through this difficulty than my children be separated from me. Meaning at times, it may look that we see a difficulty and we see a tribulation within it, but the Imam is explaining that what Allah will give you for this difficulty far exceeds the difficulty itself. One more of the hadith of Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In terms of community relations, man wa'adha akhahu sirran faqad zanahu, wa man wa'adahu alaniyatan faqad shanahu. The Imam explains, and he says, in terms of the relationships with your mu'mineen believers, advising your brother in secrecy is an adornment of him, and advising him and admonishing him publicly is a disgrace to him. Many times we imagine that haqq is haqq. I need to speak haqq wherever I see it. But no, the Imam is explaining there's a technique to teaching and guiding, and there's a way by which we should interact with those who have faith. And that the interaction of faith should be such that if I see something wrong in my believing brother, my advising him is done privately. And that will be an honor to this individual and allow him to keep his dignity in society. And my criticizing him openly and publicly for a mistake that is made is something that is a source of disgrace for him and will not allow him to keep his dignity intact. One of the common mistakes that takes place, especially in communities where we are impacted by the culture around us, is that we imagine that Iman is a source of black and white. That as soon as I see something black or something wrong, I have to admonish it. Otherwise, the goodness will fade from the situation. The teaching of the Imam is no, that more important is preserve the dignity of each other. Allow for shame to exist within your community. Have consideration for each other, and it will allow this relationship to last. Harshness is not the religion of Islam. One of the important attributes of this religion that we possess is to have kindness for each other, to have caring for each other. The demonstration of the attributes of Ahlul Bayt were such that they would take care of the people around them, whether they agreed with their faith or disagreed with their faith. And the significance of that would be is that kindness is the way. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wa maw'idhati al-hasana. Call to this religion with kindness and good words. This was the seed of the Prophet that the Imam is teaching. Each of the Imams have taken the time to teach this, and it originates from the message of Rasulullah that in every difficulty, choose the kindest path you can. And that will be one of the most important ways by which this religion is preserved and that this religion grows. We'll take an aside if you guys are okay. Everybody's all right? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad. In Surah Al-Qalam, when Allah makes the statement, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, a description of the Holy Prophet, he says that certainly you are on the most noble of characteristics. The famous story that takes place with this, and which is a demonstration for us that what does it take to have good character, is what happens in the door of the Prophet, that the Prophet is wearing a cape which ties at the neck from rough and coarse cloth. A Bedouin comes to the Holy Prophet and pulls his cape and says, give me money. It's not your money, it's not your father's money, it's Allah's money, give me money. And he pulls at the Prophet with such severity that he actually injures the neck of the Prophet from the coarseness of the cloth. Imagine yourself in that situation. Someone comes to you and asks for help. And as they ask for help, they hurt you. They abuse you and they use harsh language. Which one of us would help that person? Really difficult. We have a hard time helping somebody when they're nice to us, let alone somebody who's being mean to us. But the interaction of the Prophet was a lesson. The Prophet doesn't just give him, he smiles at him and instructs the people to give his need and fulfill his needs such that he is satisfied when he leaves. Upon the interaction of the Prophet in this way with someone who is harsh, someone who is mean and abusive, Allah reveals the verse, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, that certainly you are on the most noble of characteristics. This example of the Prophet is permeated through all of the Imams, where each of the Imams takes the time to teach and guide and help people in spite of their bad behavior, in spite of their abusive nature. And those who had good nature, the Imam did even more for them and would give them even better to make sure that they stayed in goodness. One of the examples from the life of Imam al-Askari is about a person who's known as Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, who was one of the companions of Ahlul Bayt, firm believers in Ahlul Bayt, who is walking behind Imam al-Askari through the desert. And Abu Hashim, as he's walking, realizes, oh, I have a bill due today. I have a debt that I need to settle, and today's the day the debt needs to be settled. And he begins to think to himself, as he's walking behind Imam al-Askari, how will I settle this debt? What will I do to solve this problem? How will I return the money? As he's walking and thinking about this, Imam al-Askari turns to him and he says, oh, Abu Hashim, ask us. We will solve your problems. We will aid you. They describe and say that the Imam either touched his staff on the ground or motioned on the ground and said, oh, Abu Hashim, pick it up and put it in your pocket and don't show anyone. Abu Hashim later realizes that what was there was that the Imam made for him a piece of gold that was sufficient to satisfy his debts and solve his problem. The significance of this hadith and others like it is that, one, first and foremost, show goodness to the world around you. Change the world for positive through your good character. This is what Islam taught us. That for to be a Muslim is to have good character in every situation, even when someone is harsh with you, even when someone is inappropriate with you. And then the other is that ask the Ahlul Bayt for your needs. Ask them and they will fulfill your needs. Ask by their wasila and Allah will provide for you whatever it is that you desire. The statement to Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari was not that in that moment, oh, I need to go see the Imam that he will aid me. No, if I believe that he is the authority of Allah over everything, then it is possible for me to seek benefit from the Imam and to ask by his wasila that Allah fulfills my needs. This Madhloom Imam, in the 6 years that he was the Imam of the time, the oppression against him was so severe for one reason: to ensure that he would never have a child, that there could be no one who would come after him who would be the one who changes the world. Which is why they describe and say that even the marriage of Imam Hassan al-Askari was something that was a secret and unknown to people of the time. No one knew of this marriage. No one knew of the personality who would be the wife of the Imam. Allah gave us the 12th Imam from our 11th Imam in the same way that Musa was born under the persecution of Fir'aun. The persecution of the Imam, of the 11th Imam, was such that the birth of Imam Zaman is very similar to that of Musa, that it was unknown and kept secret until the time of his birth, and then he was born. They describe and say that in the house of the Imam there would constantly be spies. There would constantly be people keeping an eye on and to ensure that if the Imam wasn't in a prison itself, that it would still be impossible for him to have any interaction. Until eventually, at the end of the 6 years, Mu'tamid Mal'un decided that it was time to end the authority of this Hujjah and try to erase him before it was that he could have any more authority in this world. They describe and say that Imam al-Askari was poisoned. But the poison that he was given was something that was given to him in the start of Rabi al-Awwal. And he lived for a period of 8 days under the effect of this poison. They describe and say that as soon as the poison was entered into his body, the Khalifa knew of what he had done. So he ensured that the entire house of the Imam was constantly surrounded, and that there were always someone inside of the house to try and prove the authenticity of, one, that the Khalifa was not responsible, and that, two, that there was no issue of the Imam and no son of the Imam that could be born to him. In this way, they describe and say that the 8 days that the Imam lived in this month of Rabi al-Awwal was of great pain and difficulty, where he was in a state of suffering. Some who argue and say that no, he died a natural death, they describe and say that on the day of the Shahadat of Imam al-Askari, he was a man of 28. He tried to raise a cup of water to his mouth, but he could not even raise it because of the severity of the poison. Where he turned to Aqid, who was a slave or a servant of his house, and he says, Aqid, give to me a sip of this water. But the weakness in the body of the Imam was such that the cup hit the teeth of the Imam, but could not quench his thirst. He turned eventually and he said, Aqid, go into the other room. You will find a young boy there. Bring him to me. They describe and say that Aqid went into a locked room, and when he opened the room, he found a young boy of 5 years of age who was in a state of prostration and sujood with one finger raised to Allah, making dua. He said, your father has called you to the other room. They describe and say that this 5-year-old boy came in the company of his father, brought the cup of water to the lips of the Imam, and was in company of his father in the time of Shahadat. Can you imagine how difficult that moment for the 12th Imam, who at the age of 5 was witnessing his father in such a state of weakness and inability that he could not drink from a cup of water himself. They describe and say in this condition it was that the sweat of death overcame the brow of Imam al-Askari. His eyes began to open and close from the severity of the pain. His hands and feet began to move from the pressure of death. His breathing became shallow until eventually the soul of the Imam left his body. Imam al-Askari became martyred in this day. Imam Zaman was the only one with him who was the one responsible for his ghusl and kafan. But with all due respect, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, though you face such a difficult moment at the age of 5, we still weep over Abu Abdullah because of the description you gave us of him. That he was that one who his son could not do ghusl for him, who could not be there to comfort him. Your father's head was in your lap, but the head of Abu Abdullah. They describe and say Imam Zain al-Abidin, when he passed by his father's body on the 11th of Muharram, Sayyidah Zainab turns and says, oh nephew, why do I see you in a condition that your soul is about to leave your body? Imam Zain al-Abidin would cry and reply, how unfortunate the son who sees his father in this condition and cannot do anything for him. Ya Ibn Rasulullah, though it was difficult for you that you were 5 in the company of your father's shahada, at least you were free to give him ghusl. You were free to give him kafan. But our Hussain ibn Ali, the one whose ghusl was done with his blood, and his kafan was the sands of Karbala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ridan biqadahi wa tasliman li amrih. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. We raise our hands in dua 10 times. Ya Allah, 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 Ya Mahmud بحق محمد, Ya A'la بحق علي, Ya فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة, Ya محسن بحق الحسن, Ya Qadim al-Ahsan bihaqq al-Hussain. Oh Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, give the thawab of this majlis to our marhumin, the marhumin of tonight's sponsors, and all those who have no one to pray for them. Ya Allah, keep us attached to the Quran and Ahlul Bayt. Ya Allah, we have gathered here with hajat. By the right of the mention of Imam al-Askari, fulfill our hajat. Those amongst our families, our communities suffering through sickness and disease, Ya Allah, give shafa'ah to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Those suffering through strife and insecurity, Ya Allah, give aman to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of the Imam of our time. Ya Allah, entitle us to ziyarat of Ahlul Bayt in this world and shifa of Ahlul Bayt in the hereafter. Matam ya Hussain.